Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'suk b'divrei Torah. V'arevna Adonai Eloheinu divrei Toratcha b'finu p'yimcha beit Yisroel, v'niyeh anachnu v'tzeitzeinu v'tzeitzeimcha beit Yisroel, kulenu yodei shemecha v'mdei Toratech lishma, Baruch atah Adonai l'mei Torah l'amo Yisrael.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher b'achabanu mikol amim v'natan lanu et Torato, Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
So I wanted, Arthur, you didn't know Ian Shapiro, but I just want to tell you a little bit about him. Obviously, Gavin can add a few things just before we get started. The Shiur is dedicated in the name of Yisroel ben Yechezkel. We were doing the Shiur for Yisroel ben Sipporah while he was alive, and the last 3 weeks has been a tremendous amount of suffering for him and his family. Very, very difficult. Um, Obviously, I don't know Ian for the 35 years or 40 years that Rav Simcha Steinhauer does, but just to let you know a little bit about what I found with Ian is that he had a couple of good, not a couple, he had many, many good character traits, but they were so well developed that, believe me, if one followed his example, you'll be held in very good stead in the world to come. One of the things I loved about Ian is even though he did extremely financially well, he was humble. He drove an old car. He never had the need to be ostentatious about his money. He never had the need to put anybody else down, both those that had less than him or less ability than him. He was intellectually brilliant. Yet in the shiurim and just in general, he'd have a conversation with you and he'd allow you your space to have a real conversation and talk to you, and he'd listen to others. I mean, the last interaction I had with Ian was on the 25th of December, and he went into hospital for COVID on the 31st of December. We were both at our Ran Cohen's Pasha Shiur, and we were speaking to each other about questions that we had. And the thing of it is, it felt like yesterday. His In terms of the shiur, Gavin will tell you when in a few minutes, once I've just discussed a couple of other things with Ian, is that he was not only was he exceptionally bright, but he prepared for everything he did. He never rested on his intelligence. A lot of people rest on their intelligence and put in the least amount of work. Ian used his ability and made sure he put in 100% effort in everything he did. Obviously, he's got an amazing family. Anna Louise is Rabbi Tatz's sister, and in her own right, she's an amazing human being. Kids, grandkids, but he's always been involved with Torah on his mindset. I mean, from when he was feeling horrendous on the 25th of December to when we had a couple of questions for each other with regards to Yosef and Yaakov and the brothers, etc. His mind was always focused on the priority of learning. Just an exceptional human being. As a lawyer, he had a passion for justice and to make sure. I mean, I remember him talking about a couple of the cases he had when we were davening at Maharsha afterwards during the Kiddush, and how passionate he was about the law and justice and making sure that his clients were treated very fairly. And he dealt with some very high profile, difficult cases. Extremely humble guy. Gavin, is there anything you want to say? I mean, you've been involved with him in the shiur for a while now.
Listen, I think you pretty much covered, all the stuff that I don't know everything that you knew, so there's a lot of new stuff that I picked up as well. But as far as character traits, I agree with you 100%. One of the most humble people that I've ever come across. Very intellectually bright, super prepared for every single shiur. Never prepared. He actually just chazorah on what we had done the previous week. He always went through it. He always had questions and answers which he sent to the group, and then people responded or Rev Simcha responded. He was very thorough and very organized. And in fact, when we started the shiur, Rev Simcha, which is we would give the shiur, would always ask Ian where the place is, exactly where we left off. And it was unbelievable. He knew exactly where we left off and where to continue. And that's because he had prepped that day specifically for that shiur. We had gone through the previous week. So he always knew what we had just covered. He always had new questions. He was always on top of it. when it came to asking questions, he was like the first guy who came in with every week 2 or 3 or 4 great questions. It was hard to beat him, even if he had the same question, to get in before him because he was so sharp and so quick. While your brain's still trying to think, he's already gone through the whole process. So it was really remarkable. And then we had a funny little incident which was lovely when I first met him, and I couldn't raise this last night because of the sensitivity. I'm scared I'm going to say something wrong. But we were writing this book together. When I started Sanhedrin, there were so many sort of loopholes to get around. If you did criminal act, civil act, whatever you did wrong, now he's a lawyer, and I'm a guy who doesn't come from that background, whose moral compass wasn't 100% correct. So we got the two of us, when we listened to all these cases going through Sanhedrin, we found all these loopholes, and we were going to write a book on how to get out of doing something wrong, from a legal perspective. And we thought we'd do so well with that book, and it was quite ironic because I come from sort of the wrong background, and he comes from 100% the right background. Anyway, he's going to be dearly missed. He also taught me something else. He used to come very prepared. He had a stender that he came and he put his book on, and I started copying him. Firstly, I wanted to be like him, but also it was a really, really nice way to come in. You sit there with your stender, your book's open, you're prepared, you organized. So really, a wonderful guy. Is going to be great to miss, and I have no idea how we're going to know where to continue from the previous show. All right, that's
Kev, you know what? The reason why I so want you to teach us this Chofetz Chaim is because Ian never spoke badly about anybody. In all the years I knew him, he never had one. Not only did he never speak badly about anybody, but one of the things I liked about him is I've got red hair and I've got a temper. And sometimes I'd have good days, and sometimes the irritation that I have of people can brim just below the surface. You know what I mean? And he's the most patient, even killed guy. He doesn't get emotional, uses his intellect, never loses his cool. He's got so many good characteristics that were incredible. And he's very careful. He never spoke Lashon Hara, not only because he was careful about the halacha, which is obvious, but he didn't have a nasty nature. He just had a good nature. So if you know him, Kev, you can add a few words.
Yeah, I met him through my family, the Markovitzes, and I went there many occasions, and I was at Simchas with him, but always a person of besimcha, a positive guy.
Totally.
Smile and like a good sense of humor, but in such a positive way. And such a nice person. It's someone who you wanted to be around. I mean, I didn't know, I don't know as well as you guys, but such a positive, such a nice guy. I mean, in simple terms, let's put it that way.
Yeah. And to be simply positive, that's what was alarming about Ian, is that there was almost a simplicity to him, that he was just naturally simply a good person. And yet when you spoke to him, all the depth of his learning and the way he would perceive and analyze was there. So, one of the things of you have people that are very intellectual and they think it's beneath them just to be simply happy and just live life with simplicity. And he had a great combination of both, So I'm really pleased you got to meet him. Arthur, obviously it was not meant to be that you did, but it would have been nice had you met him.
Well, I have sort of through you guys.
Yeah, no, it's different. Trust me, when he enters your life, there's a void when he's not there. So that's the best way I can describe it.
I'd be doing full justice, You had to meet him in person.
You can never do full justice, but that's the whole point, is words are limited. But what you do is you describe to a certain degree, and a person will hopefully get a sense. But experiential connection with a person is never replaced with descriptive wording of the person. Gavin, you're 100% right. Kevin, teach us about the laws of not speaking Lashon Hara.
Okay, so I found something very interesting. Well, teshuva for speaking Lashon Hara. Okay, is that okay? Can I proceed? Can I?
I tell you what, I don't want you to pick that.
Not that.
He didn't speak Lashon Hara. Maybe something in terms of avoidance. Teshuva is what you say when I speak Lashon Hara. When you want to give a share about me, You can talk about the Lashon Hara. Find something that prevents Lashon Hara. Let me wait for you for a...
Rechilas without mentioning any names?
Yeah, that's lovely. That's absolutely lovely.
And hence, okay, then but it's very short. I mean, there's actually 3 short little paragraphs, or one with an
Just
example.
tell us what Rechilus is, for those that don't know.
Okay, let me get to the definitions here. Let's just go through the definitions. One sec, if it's got the definitions here. Oh, here we go. Okay, so Rechilus, let me get the definition first, is... Okay, hopefully it's not trying to find it. Okay, 1 second. Okay, so Rechilas is relating to someone that another person did or said something against him. So telling someone that, this oak said this about you. That's what it is, basically.
Oh, tail bearing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Relating to someone that another person did or said something against him. Okay, so telling, but still telling, this oak did this again. He did something which is against your interest, or he said something about you, negative.
Okay, perfect.
I don't know if it applies to saying something positive. If you say this guy speaks very highly of you, I think that's okay. I say that to people.
Yeah, that is positive.
Okay. There is a general misconception that if no names are mentioned in a conversation, the dialogue is automatically free of rechilas and completely permissible. This is definitely incorrect. If the listener will be able to deduce the identity of the person you are referring to, even though you do not mention him by names, your narrative is considered rechilas, because they may be able to figure it out.
Okay, I hear you. Through inference. Okay.
And okay, shall I continue? Okay, then hints and signs. When the listener already knows about a certain action, but does not know the identity of the person responsible, you are charged with rechilas if you point out the guilty person. This is true even if you only make the identification through hints and signs. So hints and signs is almost like, it's like non-verbal communication.
Okay, so even if you insinuate it and the person works it out, it's as though you mentioned the real name because they've worked it out. Makes sense to me.
At the bottom line, it's if I say somebody lives in Potchefstroom or whatever, I won't, if I need to discuss something, I try not to, it's not easy. I'll say Potchefstroom or Afghanistan or something, they don't know. Or Islamabad in Pakistan.
Okay.
I'll make it something like that so people won't be able to figure out, but maybe one shouldn't do that. That's,
okay.
And the next one, okay, it's a bit long. Concealed rechilas, okay. You are forbidden to remind someone that another person abused him, even if you do so in a roundabout manner. Although you might not overly mention the abuse, it is nevertheless considered rechilas to allude to an incident with the intent of arousing animosity. Okay, then there's the example. Mr. Schwartz bought a car from Mr. Klein and quickly discovered that he was cheated. By the end of 2 months, the car was so dilapidated that Mr. Schwartz was forced to junk it. Meir, one of Mr. Schwartz's fellow workers, avidly disliked Mr. Klein, the car dealer, and took pleasure in hearing others denounce him. When Meir heard about the unfortunate car sale, he was eager to remind Mr. Schwartz about Mr. Klein's part in the matter. It was beneath Meir's dignity, however, to explicitly relate rechilas. Instead, he approached Mr. Schwartz and shrewdly started a conversation about Mr. Schwartz's now dilapidated vehicle. Since Meir's opening remarks were made with the intention of arousing ill will between Mr. Schwartz and Mr. Klein, Meir is guilty of spreading rechilas.
Sure.
So if he has an intention, people want to upset. Want people to start have ill feeling or start speaking badly. They want to stir it up. So that's.
Yeah, it's actually, thank you, Kevin. That was very, very, very good to learn. Very good. Before, you know what? I think it's important. I think where there's a case realistically is that if two people, this is what I've seen, Kev, I don't know if you agree. I've seen a case where two people have been kind of conned by the same person, right? Or they've been like, what do you call it? Abused by the same person in different manners. Do you get what I'm saying? And what happens is they get together and they think of what happened, they discuss it, and they work themselves into a state where they want to beat the guy half to death afterwards. So sometimes, you've both got a legitimate beef against the person, but when you get together and you work yourselves up, there can be no good that can come from something like that. Even if you don't end up acting with anger and contacting the person again or doing damage to them, you've definitely created this rechilus, as Kevin said. So, Kev, thanks very much. I'm just going to share one particular Mishna from Pikei Avot for Ian. And then we're doing a Mishna, funny enough, today, Gav, in the Gemara as part of the Gemara. So Ian gets two Mishnas. And the word Mishna and Neshama have the same letter. So obviously for somebody that passed away, we generally do Mishnahs. All right, so I'm just going to say, it's in chapter Pikei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, chapter 4, verse 1. Ben Zoma says, who is wise? He who learns from every person. As it is said, from all my teachers I grew wise. Who is strong? He who subdues his personal inclination, as it said. And who is slow to anger is better than a strong man, and a master of his passions is better than a conqueror of a city. Who is rich? He who is happy with his lot, as it is said. When you eat of your labor of your hands, you are praiseworthy, and all is well with you. You are praiseworthy in this world, and all is with you in the world to come. Who is honored? He who honors others, as it said, those who honor me, I will honor, and those who scorn me, those who scorn me shall be degraded. So I think I wanted to do this particular Mishna and Pikei Avot because this emulates and encapsulates Ian's character traits, is that he learns from others, even though he was intellectually brilliant. He really subdued his personal inclination. He was even keeled emotionally. He was slow to anger. He never got angry. He was the master of his emotions, which it says is better than a conqueror of a city. Who is rich? He who is happy with his lot. As I said, he was very humble, that even though financially did well, he was always content not to brag or show it off. And he was a very hard worker. When it says, he who eats of the labor of his hands, you're praiseworthy, and all is with you in the world to come and in this world. And he who honors others and honors Hashem, which Ian did. Ian honored Hashem. His life was Torah. Shall be honored by Hashem in this world and the next. So I wanted to just add that. And then we're going to just quickly do the Mishnah now, which I think we'll do that in Ian's merit. But
yeah, just more.
Okay, there we go. Yeah.
I had a fantastic opportunity. I got invited to Ian for supper the one night, and I went there, and it was unbelievable, and the way he portrays himself when he's at the Shiurim or in public, whatever, it's exactly the same at home, man. And I went there, and I'm just like just a regular guy coming in there. He gave me an opportunity to talk. He listened to me. He was unbelievable. He never dominated the conversation. He gave everybody an equal opportunity. And like Damon said, he's just calm all the way through. He never got upset with anybody. He's just really a remarkable person, whether he's at Shiur. I also know him from Shiur, from Mahasha. So I've known Ian actually for a little while, a little bit longer than I actually realized. I forgot since the days of Mahasha. So from Mahasha days, he's consistent, one of the nicest guys, and one of the nicest guys at Shiurim, and one of the nicest guys in home. And if someone does all those things, he's running his life superbly. All right, thanks.
All right, just one funny incident, and this is relevant to Ian, is they have a dog that's blind. And this dog, anybody else would have put down this poor dog because it bumps into furniture. not Ian. He's got the softest heart. He once rescued the dog. I think Anna Louise mentioned something about on the Friday night. Ian nearly was picking up like a slight flu or whatever because he jumped in the pool to rescue this blind dog on the Thursday, and it keeps bumping into furniture. He's got the softest heart, Ian. He's just. And as you said, at home, he conducts himself with the same gentle respect and presence that he does in others. And often we've seen it, Gavin, that people have got a dual persona. There's a persona they portray to others, and there's the persona that they are like in their home. And Ian is just got that same sort of loving persona in every environment, including
Consistent.
after this blind dog.
Most people have a personality for school, a personality for work, a personality for home. He had one personality across the board.
The Mishnah now concludes its explanation of the Muad'Din listed in the Mishnah on 15b by elaborating on the final Muad case of man listed there. Man is always Muad, i.e., he always pays in full for whatever he damages. Whether he damaged something unintentionally or intentionally, whether he did the damage while awake or asleep. If he blinded the eye of his fellow or he broke utensils, he pays full damages.
Okay. All right. So obviously, I'm going to leave that screen up for a little while, just while I discuss the first part, and then I'm going to remove it in terms of the Mishnah and how it works. All right. So if you see here that the Gemara has a grouping of two cases in the final clause to teach us a very, very important law. So this seems like kind of strange, is that firstly, it's got this term, if he blinded the eye of his fellows or he broke utensils. Those two things don't seem analogous at all. Does that make sense? Why would breaking utensils have anything to do with damaging a human being? They don't seem congruous. That's their first issue. And then why, after the fact that whether a person damages something unintentionally or intentionally, whether awake or asleep, does that go into blinding of the eye of his fellow? In other words, if you're talking about vessels that are damaged, you say, okay, when he's asleep and he's unaware or it was unintentional, he's as responsible for the payment as when he's awake. And then with regards to breaking of utensils, we know the theme. But what's confusing, if you just read this Mishnah on first application, is why does it talk about in the middle if he blinded the eye of his fellow? Okay, I think that's a reasonable question. So I just want to just go through a little bit of revision on a particular topic, okay? You're liable to pay for what you damage if you sleep only if the person that's sleeping lay down, and those articles of value were next to him. Are you with me? In other words, you go to somebody for Shabbos. Remember, this is one of the very, very first things we learned, guys. That if you're going to somebody for Shabbos, Art, do you remember this?
Yeah, I remember this one.
That you've got to make sure that those things are put away from your care, because when you sleep, the default position is you're going to thrash around in your sleep, and you probably, by stretching or turning over, are going to break those articles. However, you're not responsible if, when you're sleeping, for some reason, someone comes into the room that you're in and puts those prized possessions next to you and you've thrashed in your sleep. Why? Because they were negligent with their own articles. And therefore, that was not in your state of consciousness where you could have avoided it. While you're awake, it's in your state of consciousness. And then that is known as what you call an ones gamor, which is an unavoidable mishap. So an unavoidable mishap is discussed in Sanhedrin. We did this, Gavin, 72a, and it talks about that clause, bain ba'ones or bain baratzon. So whether you did so unwillingly or willingly. So ratzon is your will, but ones means unwilling. Does that make sense? So whichever way you've done it, it discusses those various cases in death penalty cases specifically. But if somebody places articles next to you, I mean, Tosfot discusses in 27b, what we know as the difference between an unavoidable mishap and something that has to do with avoidable. Because if it's an unavoidable mishap, then you're not willing to have it done, and it's obviously beyond your control. So do you remember when we mentioned a shomer? Arth, do you remember what a shomer is?
Remind me.
A
God,
guardian. A
A
guardian.
guardian,
There
yes.
were different
Okay.
types of.
Yeah.
There was an unpaid guardian and a paid
Paid guardian,
guardian.
yeah.
There was a borrower and there was a lender and a renter. You remember all these different sort
Yeah,
of
yeah.
cases. Now, do you remember there were various degrees of responsibility? So how that worked, because this is mentioned in the Gemara on some of the notes. This was Tosfot. We learned this in 4a. And what we learned is that the more of a favor you were doing for somebody, in other words, they went to Australia and they said, look after my stuff, I got a duck, the less responsible you'd be for those things going wrong. Why would you be less responsible for those things going wrong? Well, very, very simply, is that you're doing the guy a favor. Now, if you landed up in court for something that you did the guy a favor, if you said, listen, look after my stuff, you said, Chan, I don't need a lawsuit. Good luck with your trip to Australia. I can't help you. Whereas if you were doing him a favor, but he made you less obligated, you'd be more inclined to do him a favor. If he was doing you the favor, in other words, lending you something because you didn't have that tool, whereas in that particular case, your responsibility is greater. Why is your responsibility greater? Well, why would you lend somebody something if if you had no legal recourse if they destroyed it? So the more of a favor you did for somebody else, the more legally responsible they are. So it ended up discussing the accidents, the incidents of the Shomrim, and saying, hey, what if you're each doing each other a favor? Like, the guy's renting from you, so he's doing a favor because he can't afford to buy the article. Take car rental, for example. Kev, you awake? Okay, so take, for example, I'm renting a car from Kevin and I don't have the money to buy the car that he wants. He's doing me a favor because I couldn't afford to purchase that car, but I'm doing Kevin a favor because he's getting monthly revenue in his spare car. So how's that relationship worked? Anyway, so we discussed it in 4b. The thing I want you to realize is you've got to look at civil law damages with man as a category of an order of unavoidable mishap. In other words, say somebody stole something from you with regards to theft. They hijacked Shimon. If they hijacked Shimon, that's known as an unavoidable accident. If Shimon lost the article, that is more negligence. Do you get what I'm saying? So we hold somebody more responsible the more negligent they are. And the classic case that Tosfot brings is in 4b with regards to the Shomrim. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if before you went to bed at somebody's house for Shabbos, you didn't put away the articles, that is your responsibility because you've got to assume the default position is once asleep, is that you're going to thrash around and move about and possibly break something. If somebody placed it next to your bed after you fell asleep, they've been negligent with their things, and therefore it's an unavoidable mishap category to you. Okay, so now that we've got that basis, let's go back and just share the screen and see what's going on with this case of blindness. Okay, so Gavin, if you see here, it says man is always muad, he always pays in full for whatever he damages, whether he damaged something unintentionally or intentionally, whether he did the damage while awake or asleep. Now, this is the weird part. If he blinded the eye of his fellow or he broke utensils, he pays full damages. Okay, so what is the term if he blinded the eye of his fellow doing that? It seems incongruous to the rest of the context of breaking utensils when you're awake or asleep. So it's coming to use that word of what you call like a hekesh. The hekesh is when you've got a theme running. Now, do you remember that when we learnt about the 39 melochot of Shabbat, these were based on the 39 creative acts of building the Mishkan, the tabernacle. And the one pasuk went to the next pasuk. Do you remember that, guys?
Yes.
So this is the same thing. The Mishnah goes from one thing to another. When we say that you damage something unintentionally or unwillingly, we're saying that if you blinded the eye of your fellow accidentally, We're not saying through to negligence. We're actually saying accidentally. So the degree of negligence will determine how many of the other sort of payments you made. Like when man injures man, you're liable for 4 other payments. But if it's accidentally, we're going to find out you only pay for actual damage. Okay? And in addition to that, you pay for pain, according to Rashi. We're going to find out why. According to the Yosei Nimukei Yosef, you actually also pay for humiliation and medical bills, because he brings 2 other sources, but Rashi says no, it's just actual damage and pain. And we're going to find out why you add pain to that list. So we're saying just like if you break a utensil, you're only responsible for paying for that utensil. So too, if you blind somebody accidentally, you pay for the damage of the eye, but it's as if you're paying for the utensil. You don't have to pay for the medical bills and humiliation and things like that. Does that make sense, Gavin? That's why the two are put next to each other as a hekesh. So we're going to read from the Gemara. I hope you don't mind the introduction. I hope.
But just say that about the medical expenses again. Just repeat that point.
Okay.
Just the medical expenses.
If how do we get these 4 other damages? We study a case, which we're going to go through in the Gemara, where 2 men are fighting. Now, if 2 men are physically quarreling, person doesn't want to get hit from his fellow. So what's the first thing he's going to do? He's going to knock him out, because he doesn't want to get hit. Now, is that intentional or unintentional?
Intentional.
Obviously. Because it's not, there is, if you're going to have a physical conflict, there's an intention to cause damage. So we also learn these laws from if a wife of a man, where 2 men are quarreling, gets involved and grab the person that's going to try and attack her husband by his private parts, in that particular case, we say that she is responsible for those other things. Because what was she doing grabbing his genitals? Is she wanted to render him in so much pain that he'd be unable to hit her husband. So her intention there was clearly to make sure she incapacitated him by the most vulnerable place he has. As we learn that those are cases of intentional damage. And that's the basis at which we say if one maims his fellow, and we talk about the damage, that when man damages man, you're liable to the 4 other things. You've got actual damage, nezek shalom, complete damage. You've got pain, you've got medical, you've got convalescing, which is the healing process and recovery, where you get paid for the time you would have been working at your new position, as well as for the humiliation. In a case where your genitals are grabbed, it's humiliating. So yes, but in contrast, I'm coming to you now, we're learning a case where if somebody accidentally blinded his fellow, he's entitled to pay actual damage, and even according to Rashi, definitely the pain aspect, and also according to the Gemara, but that's a separate part, but at the very least the actual damage, and that's why it's compared to utensils. Because just like utensils, if you broke a utensil, whether you're sleeping or awake, and it was accidental, if you accidentally broke a utensil in your sleep, you have to pay for it. Here, if you accidentally take out somebody's eye, you have to pay for it. So that's why the 2 verses are next to each other. All right, Kev, what did you want to ask?
No, I'm just saying, how can they compare utensils to blinding someone's eye?
I'll tell you how they can. Because we learn the word, when a person is asleep and when a person is awake, it doesn't matter what his intent was. He has to pay for that damage. That's the first premise that the Mishna sets up. Premise number 1. Premise number 2 is it uses an example of sleeping or awake to give you the perfect term of a state of unawareness, because there's no more state of unawareness than being completely unconscious and asleep. You can't doubt that a person that is asleep is unaware. So that is the perfect example, and that you can't say, I didn't see this incident coming, and therefore we know that you have to put away these articles before you sleep, because you've got to come to that conclusion that when you don't have self-control because you're out of it, that you have to prevent these sort of damages. So one of the categories we're going to learn about negligence is preventative damage. If negligence is not only causing something actively, but failing to prevent something by not taking the sort of precautions. So therefore we're saying, listen, if you took somebody's eye out and it was completely accidental, you are not obligated to pay the same damage as if it was intentional. If two men are fighting in a bar, and you intend to hurt the other person, you have to pay for not only the actual damage, but pain, medical, convalescing, and humiliation, if the humiliation aspect is there. But if your ox damages somebody, the ox never premeditated to injure this person. He doesn't have dias. He doesn't have the same sort of ability. Kev, I'm answering your question. He doesn't have the same sort of ability as a human being that knows consequence. An ox doesn't. An ox gets upset and an ox reacts. A human being cannot react from just being
instinct.
Upset. Instinct.
Oh,
That's exactly it. And therefore, he's obligated to those other payments because there's a higher degree of responsibility. So what does this have to do with blinding a person? When Kevin asked a good question, how can this be compared to blinding somebody? Well, it can, because if you if for example you blinded somebody, the Gemara is going to bring a case where you try to heal somebody. You're a doctor, and in that case, your slave says, "Listen, can you tend to my eye, or can you tend to my tooth?" And in that particular case, in the essence of trying to help the person, there's a tragedy, and the guy loses his eye, or loses his tooth. Do you have to set that slave free for abuse, or is it considered that your intention was to medically help the person? And since there wasn't negligence on your part, and you try to heal the person, there obviously are two opinions. One is, according to Kevin, is that you still have that greater degree of responsibility to a certain degree, and the other is your intent does count. So just like if your intent was unintentional and you still have to pay for damage, that's one of the chiddush. Is, Kevin, I could turn around and say, I've never meant to hurt you. Like, say I'm playing golf. This happened to me. I'm playing golf. I went to four ways, mini putt-putt. And and a friend of mine, I jacked off the ball on a tee, and I smacked him, and he looked like the Elephant Man when I was done. I didn't hit him with the club, but the ball went at 200 k's an hour. It's surprising he still stood. Anyway, that thing ball hit him, and I would have to pay for the actual damage, but I wouldn't have to pay for medical damage if I wasn't negligent. If I made sure he wasn't out of the way, I would have to pay for these other things for a greater degree of negligence. But if it was accidental, say I wasn't any good at golf, he was standing behind me and the ball took a U-turn or whatever. In that particular case, Kevin, I can't turn around and say it was an accident, I don't have to pay. That's the first thing that the Gemara wants to tell you. Normal people turn around and say, this is a classic thing in South Africa. They hit your car and they say, look, it was an accident, I'm sorry. So whenever somebody says, I'm sorry, it's an accident, what are these magic words, sorry? Does it mean you don't have to pay? Does it mean that if you never premeditated to hit my car 3 weeks in advance, that you're any less obligated to pay? No, you have to pay. And if Reuven accidentally took out Shimon's eye with no negligence, he still has to pay for damage. So that's what it teaches us. Kevin, it's not that he doesn't have to pay. He has to pay for the actual damage, but he doesn't have to pay all these additional costs that come with actual intent to damage. That's what the Gemara is going to teach us.
Because it was accidental.
Yes, because there wasn't negligence, there was no ill will, it was unwillful, it was unintentional, and in that particular case, you pay for actual damage. That's what it's teaching, but to pay for all these additional payments are not necessary. Obviously, for pain, that's also a factor that's added in some cases, as Rashi will explain and the Gemara will explain. So I think we finished today at 10. I think we're going to go through the rest of the Gemara in detail tomorrow. All I wanted to do was set up the principles of the Muadim for man. I hope I did a decent job.
Very good.
Well, it's